Point 5. That God is not mighty in evil, but that there is another, an evil potency. Therefore, it is firmly to believe that because there exists in God no potency for evil, by which he might bring evil things into existence, there is another principle, one of evil, who is potent in evil. From that one flows all evils which were, are, and shall be. It is evidently of him that David says, "Why dost thou glory in malice, thou that art mighty in iniquity? All the day long thy tongue hath devised injustice, as a sharp razor thou hast wrought deceit. Thou hast loved malice more than goodness, and iniquity rather than to speak righteousness."
Welcome to the Hyperfixation, where my friends come onto my show and tell me about things that excite them for 30 to 45 minutes or longer, depending on the day. My name is Roma. I use the they and them pronouns. Today, I'm joined by Wheels.
Hey, I'm Wheels. I use they or she pronouns. And I'm here to talk about old religions, as is my wont.
I'm so excited. This is not your first time being on this show talking about old religions, and I'm always excited for it. I'm so hype, especially because I know almost nothing about old religions. I think most people don't know a lot about old religions, but you're definitely top tier on my list of learning from on that topic.
Thank you. It's one of my favorite things to ramble about when I'm at a party that I don't want to be at because there's too many people and it's overwhelming. So I'll corner one person away and tell them about Cathars or whatever, which is what we're going to do today. Do you know what a Cathar is?
No, I have no idea.
You'll find out later.
Hell yeah. Oh my gosh. So before I learned about the Cathars, last time we talked about
the Sethians last time.
The Sethians. There we go.
Sometimes might be known as the Sethian Gnostics, but listeners, I want you to have the same reaction that I do when I hear someone making a reference to quote unquote the Gnostics, which is to have like the Kill Bill alarm sound go off in your with the because, and this idea will come up in our topic for today, but like the term Gnosticism came much later. It was a way that later writers described earlier movements and lumped together a bunch of different groups that were only similar as far as the later writers were concerned. They were similar in some ways, but those similarities were emphasized by later writers. And so that category we have of the Gnostics is like far too broad. And that's like a really recurring thing in the study of religion that you have to be careful about. And today's going to be another cautionary tale like that. But yeah, the last time we talked about the Sethians, who now we might call a Gnostic group, although we should be careful using that word because it was a later thing made up. But yeah, that's who we talked about last time.
Mm-hmm. I know we covered it before, but just in case listeners today have not listened to that episode, what's your history with learning and studying old religions?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert. I won't claim to be, but in college, I was a philosophy student, for which I apologize. No one should ever be a philosophy student.
Oh my gosh.
I'm kidding, but we are the worst kind of person.
Hey, yo.
But I also ended up through that, and also to satisfy a lot of gen ed requirements, I took a lot of religious studies courses, either to satisfy philosophy requirements or gen ed. So I don't have any, formal degree in the subject matter, but I did get a lot of university schooling in the matter, and it's just remained an interest of mine ever since.
Hell yeah. And so you're here with us in the Moonshot Network. So obviously a lot of people would know you from Moonshot. I know you have a project you're working on. It's not quite released yet, but I do believe there's an episode of it on Patreon.
Yeah, it's not even fair to say not quite really. It takes me so long because yeah, it's about this subject matter. It's a religious studies show called Total Depravity. You can indeed find the pilot episode of it if you are a patron in good standing with Moonshot. You should be able to watch that if you scroll back far enough in the feed. Or if you want, I'm sure I can get the link for your listeners if they're patrons and have trouble finding it. But anyway,
Mhm.
it just with that show, I want to make sure that I get everything right, and it's a hard subject matter about which to get everything right.
Mhm.
So the research just takes a darn long time. I'm in the midst of writing the second episode. Made a lot of progress lately, so I'm hoping that I'll have the second episode done before too long. And I want to make 4 before I release the first chunk of episodes. So you'll see it in a few years, probably.
Hell yeah. I'll be waiting. I'll be here, patient. I got my little coffee.
But I also make very random encounters weekly, so there's always that on the front burner that makes it take a little longer for Total Depravity episodes.
True. Hey, I mean, the actual play is important. It's important for the diet. Oh, man.
Yes.
So for today's topic, where did that specifically become? And is it just something that was interesting during your studies in university, or did you
No, so what we're doing today is it kind of comes as an offshoot of what I'm researching for the next Total Depravity episode. For the next Total Depravity, I'm going to be talking about an extinct religious movement called Manichaeism, or Manichaeanism, depending on how you want to spell it,
Mhm.
Which is an ancient religion, and I'm working on that. The subject matter of today's of what we're going to be talking about today is much later than that. With this subject matter, we're talking about like the 1100s, so medieval as opposed to ancient.
Mhm.
But there are actually some loose connections between Manichaeism and what we're going to be talking about. So it just like I had heard about this subject matter before and bumped into it again as I was doing my research for that episode of Total Depravity, and it's a fun little rabbit hole, and I don't know that I would ever do a full episode on it for Total Depravity because it gets into because it's not like not a ton of like theology or like ideas stuff to talk about, which is what I like to do on that show. It's more like politics and stuff when you get into the nitty gritty, which thankfully today we
Ooh.
won't. But
Woo.
yeah, so that's that.
Heck yeah. I realize that sometimes having like specific knowledge backgrounds will probably no, how do I want to phrase this? I have mentioned before, and I'll say it again. I don't know much at all about, especially old religions, modern religions. Like I know the base surface level amount of stuff. So I'm probably going to ask a lot of questions. Or
Please do.
perfect. Okay. And so I know the listeners might be like of varying levels of understanding. So I know that there's a lot of people, especially with the last episode, were like, "Oh hey, like hell yeah, this is my shindig," and I'm like, "Oh hell yeah, cool." But yeah, I think that's it. I know very little. I'm very excited to ask questions, and I'm very excited to hear you talk about this.
Yeah, and feel free to just like straight up interrupt me if you have a question, because sometimes I get on long-winded sentences. But if you got a question, it's more important that I like cover things that I wouldn't be thinking to cover that would be important. Because yeah, it's easy to forget that sort of thing. But should I just get into it?
Yes, let me grab my timer. The timer, I think, is just a formality at this point. But
Yeah,
the
I might be able to get it in under the timer today. Because like the gist of it shouldn't be that long. And that's
Okay.
what we're doing today is the gist of it. So
Hell yeah. Well, I'm pressing the timer in 3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, let's talk about Cathars. So,
Woo!
like I said, we're in the 1100s, or that's where most of our interest is going to be. But I actually kind of have to start backwards because in the late 1100s into the 1200s, Catholic Church launched a crusade in the region we're about to talk about. But this is before, later crusades would involve trying to take Jerusalem from, from Ottoman or rather from Muslim hands, right?
Mhm.
But this is a crusade within Catholic Europe. So kind of a different element there. But the Catholic Church launches a crusade to stamp out heretics in an area of France called Languedoc, which is like in the south of France.
Mhm.
They do a crusade. They destroy they attack cities and kill and execute people if it was considered like a center of that heretical opposition to the church.
Mhm.
And all of the issues are today would seem pretty idiosyncratic what they're fighting over and what they would consider heretical. But it was important enough that the Catholic Church saw it as a threat that these movements were happening in this region that they considered heretical. So they sent in this crusade, and then after that, they sent in all of these inquisitors to like make sure that the stamping out that they had done was finished, right?
Yeah. Oh,
And
quick
to like,
question.
yeah,
What is an inquisitor? Because I keep hearing this
yeah.
word and I don't know what it means. Like I vaguely know what crusade means, but like inquisitor just sounds scary as a whole.
They're both pretty scary. I wouldn't, you don't want to be on the receiving end of a crusade or an inquisition. A
Ooh.
crusade is going to feel like a war because it's a bunch of people coming in and killing people, destroying buildings, capturing leaders and military. Um, crusade is going to feel like the church is invading you if you're on the receiving end of it. An
Oh my god.
inquisition, on the other hand, is uh some dude from another country, some Catholic monk or higher in rank from likely another country is going to come into your village and knock on every door and interview, quote unquote, use enhanced interrogation techniques
Oh
um,
my lord.
to figure out if any of the heresy that they wanted to stamp out with the crusade remains, and if it does, either force a conversion or execute the person, or some variation of that. Not fun.
No. Oh my goodness.
So the reason we kind of have to start from the 1200s and work back is because history is written by the victors. I'm sure you've heard that.
Mhm.
Um, the victors were the Catholic Church, right? Like, the Cathars were stamped out, or rather, heresy in that region was stamped out.
Mhm.
Um, and so our description of those people and what they believed and what their protest against the church, how that manifested and what they believed in, what we know about that comes largely from the writings of the inquisitors, rather than those being interrogated, tortured, executed, etc. So we don't have a fantastic picture of those earlier years of those movements. That quote from the beginning that I read is from a late 1200s Cathar who is writing down doctrines, but that's after the Crusade, right? So it's hard to say like what was it different before the Crusade? Like how would those beliefs have differed? It's tough to say
Yeah.
because we only have either the Inquisitors' sources or some, but not a lot of sources of Cathars who lived after the Inquisition, although they didn't live long because, as I said, the Crusade and Inquisition were largely successful. So there are some people who still today say like, "Oh yeah, our group is like we trace our lineage back to the Cathars," but strictly speaking, the group that comprised the Cathars in the 1200s no longer exist because of the Crusade.
Hey, yo.
That's the basics of like the history. Do you have any questions before I get into the other bit that's hard to get into?
No, my brain is like, I can't help but like put put myself in people's shoes. Like if I'm watching a horror movie, I'm now the person getting, the damage in the horror movie. Or if I'm watching a romance novel or reading a romance novel, I'm like, ah, yes, I'm the main love interest. But in this situation, I'm just like, holy crap, if somebody came to my door and was just like, hey, are you Catholic now? And I just look around my room and I'm like, I don't know, I've got Frankie from One Piece, I've got Gojo up here, I don't know, man. It just that's just kind of where my brain went for a couple of seconds, but I think all of that stuck pretty good. I think I just trying to figure out like, where did Cathar come from? So is it just like a combination, there's just a title they gave that group of people, or
that question is therein lies the rub. So I can give you two answers to this question because this is a subject matter about which religious scholars are not in agreement. Basically, two camps. I don't know which one is right, but I can give you one or the other. So I'll give you both. But
okay.
To start, I got to give you one or the other. So listen to the. It's sort of do you want to listen to the devil wheels on your left shoulder or the angel wheels on the right shoulder? I'll just have you pick left or right, and that'll determine which I start with.
Well, let's go through one ear and out the other. Let's start with the left.
Okay, cool. I had in my head that was the devil on your left shoulder. So, so we're gonna kind of rip the Band-Aid off and get into the real tricky bit, which is that the Cathars might never have existed.
Oh
no. So it is true that there was dissent among church leaders and generally the populace of that region of France and in northern Italy. And it's also true, as we already talked about, that after the Inquisition, there are, in the 1200s, there are groups who are like, yep, we are Cathars. Here are the things we believed. I started this episode with a quote from one of those people. But what's tricky is that we don't know for sure if there was even a single group, called Cathars organized in any sort of way before. It might just be, and in fact, it's almost certainly more nuanced than there was a group called the Cathars that were flourishing here. And probably, according to the skeptics, the more, the people who say the Cathars didn't exist in the 1100s, they're going to say that there were a bunch of reasons, because I was trying to get into this bit of the, figure out the 1100s, like read a little bit up on it of like, try to read a little more than I had heard previously and to prepare for this, and like getting into the nitty gritty of it. It's like, oh wow. It's like, there was dissent about the election of the cardinal, blah, 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 and the Georgian reform, and it's like, oh my god, I know nothing about this like 1100s Catholicism politics.
Oh my!
So it gets really difficult for me as a non-expert to really get all of the reasons that there was dissent in this region at the time. But suffice it to say, a lot of it was political. A lot of it was about like the church leaders there's connection with the monarchy and how that kind of might have pulled them away from the from being super loyal to like the papacy, to like the Pope. So they might have been more loyal to their king or their archduke or whatever than they were to the church, even though they were church fathers of the region. And that might have been enough to launch a crusade, right? Just that they weren't playing ball. But the skeptics think that what happened is that once the crusade happens and once they send in particularly once they send in the inquisitors, these inquisitors are just like monks and shit who who have been taught on ancient writers, like books by ancient writers, talking about how they dealt with heretics of their era, like the Manichaeans or like the Sethians we talked about last week. So the monks of the 1100s, that would be the Inquisitors, are learning how to root out heretics from ancient writers talking about an entirely different kind of them heretic. And they might have accidentally just kind of transposed. They're like, oh, okay, these people in France in 1100 with me right now, they're heretics. So they must be the same kind of heretics that I've been reading so much about from like 600 years ago. Especially because you probably don't speak, the Inquisitors usually didn't speak the language of the people that they were interrogating.
Oh
So,
man.
so it ends up being that like the picture that we have of the Cathars, as presented to us by the Inquisitors, it's impossible to say how much of it actually existed in the sentiment of Christians in southern France at the time, and how much of it was a creation of the Inquisitors that then later people kind of took on, like kind of reclaimed, I guess you would say, to use like modern parlance, to be like, yeah, we are Cathars actually. Like, and I'll get into what that means and like what those people believed and that sort of thing. But the thought was that like the Cathars of the 1200s were people who, as a reaction to the Inquisition, were like, yeah, we actually do believe the things that you're accusing us of. We just think it's good. As kind of a defiance to the people inquisiting them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just sitting here. I'm like, either this was completely planned out or a project management's worst nightmare. Like,
yeah.
Oh my gosh. I'm so stressed. I can't even. I mean, I could see it happening because people have sucked in history and in modern times, but like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, it sucks. Any way you look at it, it sucks. Either there was this group and there, the tradition. So this skeptical narrative that I've been describing has only came about in like the 90s, like the 1990s. For most of before that, everybody thought that, yeah, there was this group. They, took the later writers kind of at face value, the 1200s writers at face value, that there was indeed this group that was like this kind of organized counter church in the Languedoc region of France, and that's why the Crusade was launched, and that's who the Inquisitors were rooting out. But yeah, when you actually arrange the text that we have in chronological order, you only start seeing references to Cathars as a group, and to even just to the idea of there being like one organized counter church that was being inquisited. I don't even know if that's the right form of the term, but anyway, that there was like one church that was being one heresy that was being rooted out, that was like an organized thing. That's what's been called into question. Sorry, that was a rambling sentence, but yeah.
No, it all made sense. It all tracks. I am hanging on. Goodness.
So now you know the two. Now you know the two narratives. There's either there was that church and they were stamped out, and the writings that we have from those 1200s writers do represent a belief system that pre-existed them, or they didn't exist in the 1100s and came into existence through reaction formation, through interaction with these Inquisitors. But now that we've got all of that annoying historical nuance out of the way, do you want to talk about like beliefs and things? Because we actually can talk about what those 1200s Cathars believe with some level of certainty.
Yeah, there's what I think I know, that at least with what I think modern like Catholics are believing in, but I honestly have no idea. I believe in my little baby boy Jesus, my little kitty cat. Well, I can't believe in him because he's real, but
well, so the one of the key distinguishing factors between I'll keep saying these are the 1200s version that we know did exist. When we look at what they believed, a key difference between them and the Catholic Church is that instead of the 7 sacraments that the Catholic Church had, the Cathars had a different one. The sacraments being like baptism and confirmation and boy, I didn't grow up Catholic, so I don't remember what all of them are, but it's like, it's these actions that we can take in the physical world that, depending on what kind of Christian you are, either metaphorically or literally participate in some sort of corresponding spiritual action, right? So like
Mhm.
you're getting baptized as either a representation or a literal act of like cleansing your soul, or you're taking communion, the Eucharist, to either metaphorically or literally eat the body of Christ, right?
Mhm.
These are sacraments. And the Cathars have a different one called, and this is like my favorite, I don't really know a lot of Latin, but this is like my favorite vocab word of the episode. It's a Latin word, consolamentum. I don't know, just fun to say.
I like it a lot, honestly.
The consolamentum is what's depicted in that picture I sent for you for the episode art.
Yeah.
So the belief was that you had to be initiated as a good Christian by another, because that's what they would call themselves, is just other good Christians, because they didn't necessarily use the term Cathar as self-identification all the time until later. But you would need to be be initiated by another Cathar, and that would take the form of, they would lay their hands on you and they would say a prayer, and that would kind of like initiate you into the church formally. And then also, before you die, the same thing has to happen again in your final moments. So it's like preparing you for death, essentially. That's the sacrament that the Cathars had that was very important, called the consolamentum.
That's that I hadn't considered that. That is not something I've in my little autistic brain world. I was just like, wait, you gotta like prep that far in advance for death?
Yeah. So you both have to do it earlier in life as an initiate. You have to be initiated, and then also right before death, ideally you need like a church father around you to do it. But like, if worst comes to worst and you die on the battlefield or whatever, any Christian who knows the right hand movements and will do, kind of thing.
Best case scenario, you got a father, but anyone will do. Anyone will be fine.
Yeah. And one of the theological reasons behind the consolamentum is likely also why a lot of the inquisitors got things confused, because it's likely that the laying on of hands was just like some sort of cultural thing that was happening and didn't necessarily have like tons of like theological meaning to it, and might have just been like, yeah, we do that around here, it's tradition or whatever. We get one of the elders to lay their hands on you before you die. It's just it's like, it helps you pass on, prepares you for the Lord, but to inquisitors it might have looked very similar to some ancient different what they would consider heretics, the Manichaeans, who I'm doing that episode of Total Depravity about.
Mhm.
They were what you would call dualists, which means that they believe in a distinct, like, there is a good spiritual world and there is a well, I should be more general. If I'm talking about just dualists in general, I should say there is like a spiritual world and there is a material world, and they are fundamentally distinct and they are opposed, and the interaction between spirit and physical is like a key component of how the theology of Manichaeism works. And so they believed that there was like light hidden in everyone, that was this like kind of spiritual light in everyone that was trapped in our material bodies that had to be released back into the spirit world for things to be as they should be in the universe. And so Manichaeans and also some of the groups that they would have called Gnostic had beliefs like this. And it's possible that they saw the laying of hands in the Languedoc. They saw the stuff like the laying of hands as like indicative that the people there were trying to like, it was like, oh, releasing the light out of this person before they die. They just kind of they made a connection between 2 points that maybe they shouldn't have, and that's possibly where some of the confusion
they
arose.
assumed.
I should be careful about that because it's not for certain that that's where the confusion is, but like that's an example of where some of this confusion between ancient heretics and these 1100s, dissenters, where that confusion might have happened in the minds of the Inquisitors.
Yeah, that makes sense. That tracks. Especially if there's like a language barrier or you're not really like
exactly
able to explain it. That does make sense. But not in the ways that I want it to make sense.
Yeah. What else should I cover about their beliefs? We're probably getting close to time. Boy. So the Cathars of the 1200s who did exist end up taking on this dualism, right? That may or may not have kind of been like imposed upon the people of this region, whether or not it pre-existed the Inquisition or not. Dualism kind of did end up flourishing and developing there for a little while until it died out as well. But one of the reasons that was a belief that the Catholics wanted to stamp out is because those dualists believe that because they believe that the material world is bad and the spiritual world is good, they didn't believe that Jesus had a physical body, and rather that he was a spiritual being who only appeared physical when he was here on Earth. And therefore, the dying on the cross thing is not key to, it's not a key component in the salvation theology of the Cathars of the 1200s. To them, Jesus's act was act that saved the world was, establishing the church, the true church that would, follow him and his principles, and being part of that true church is what saves you, rather than, particularly being absolved of sin because of his death on a cross. And so the Catholics are pretty set on the whole he had a physical body, he died on the cross thing. They've built a lot around that. So it's another reason why dualistic thought like that is quite threatening to the Catholic Church, because, they need to keep the physicality of Jesus' suffering factors into the theology a lot. So someone who rejects that altogether is a threat. So that's also interesting.
That's so... Oh my goodness. Like, I've been studying business from small to like corporate levels my entire collegiate life. And I just keep hearing things that these churches are doing that just sounds like them trying to retain customers.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just like, oh my goodness.
It's this, it really, there are a lot of comparisons. And like here, yeah, you could think of it the same way as like, they can't allow this theology to spread because it might make them lose congregants, right? If they don't have to come and take the communion to be saved, if they only need some random bishop from France to lay hands on them before they die, they're not going to be tithing to us if they don't think they have to, kind of thing.
Ooh-wee. And I'm trying to keep my brain from seeing every single thing as something completely terrible, but also it's hard when a lot of the things I hear are just completely terrible. Does that make sense? I'm trying not to be disrespectful when I'm expressing this emotion, because I know that there's good people out there, obviously. But
well, I mean, there's for every inquisitor, there's also like the people being inquisited, the inquisitees were also religious believers, right? They just believed slightly differently. So there's a whole span of religious experience, and it is often used by power in unfortunate ways. But the belief itself, or rather, belief itself, is neutral. It just matters who's using it and how they are. But yeah, we can mostly wrap it up there. A little ramblier maybe than my last one, because this is farther out of my particular area of interest. I'm more into the ancient stuff, but learning about this thing where these medieval scholars learned a little too much about the ancient stuff that I also like reading about, and possibly fanficked their way into doing a genocide against a group that didn't exist before they started.
Oh my
god. And I don't know, that just struck me as wild. So
it is wild.
Hopefully it was somewhat coherent and I didn't butcher it too much, but
no, it tracks. I think I'm spending a lot of my time what's the face? I'm trying to think of the right face, but it's just kind of like when their eyes are like looking two separate ways and they're like, oh my god. Like so much has happened. And you can say that about everything, but I guess it's kind of blowing my mind a little bit. I do have some questions about the thumbnail you sent me, just so I can get, if you're able to answer the question. So obviously we see I'm assuming a bishop of some sort laying their hands on someone, probably. Yeah, I don't know what the word is.
Image, it's like a circle, and in the circle you've got two monks in brown on the right who are the Catholics, and then you have the you have the depiction of the Cathars giving this person the consolamentum. So yeah, they're laying hands on this person who is kneeling, and providing that sacrament that they do. So so it looks like there are two Cathar fathers or initiates who are giving the consolamentum to either a new initiate or someone who's about to die.
Yeah. I've been trying to figure out the whole story, because I know that this is probably like also how they express or explain that history, but it does definitely look like, with my 2023 eyes, that as one person's getting the blessing, I guess you could say, the other guy is like, y'all need to back up, and holding like a finger up to him.
Yeah,
like,
I don't know I don't know the full context of this image. I imagine it's supposed to be depicting like the disagreement between the Cathars and the monks about the ritual that you see being performed there. And so that's why the guy in the back there is like raising like a wagging no figure at the Catholics, I think. But I don't know enough about the context of like who drew this image and when. I imagine it's a medieval illustration, but I'm not certain. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that it's the Cathars on the left being depicted as giving the consolamentum.
And I have always wondered this, and I think you might be the first person I've been next to while I've been wondering this. Well, next to in the sense of a digital space. So the monks, they have this little ring of hair around their head. Do you know why they do that?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't. I bet I could. Monk ring hair. A tonsure, according to Wikipedia, is the practice of cutting or shaving some or all of the hair or of the scalp, or rather the hair on the scalp, as a sign of religious devotion or humility. The term comes from the Latin meaning clipping. I guess it just looked pious, I guess.
I just wish I could be a fly on the wall for that one, of telling the first guy he's got to shave off most of his hair.
I want to know, like, the second person to do it. Like, why did you come along? Like, the first person, like, people have gotten bad haircuts all the time. But, like, who was the guy who was like, you know what? That guy's onto something. You know what I mean? Who is the first follower? That's the real question.
Was he just beautiful? It's just like, oh man, well, the hot guy did it.
Trying to emulate in whatever way was possible, but picking all the wrong ways. Could be. I'll have to come on later after doing a lot more research, and we can talk about the tonsure.
Absolutely. So now that you've acquired this information in your studies, while you were studying another thing, if I understood that correctly.
Yeah.
did this I I'm asking a large question and I'm trying to make it not such a large
Yeah,
question, but
yeah.
I'm thinking about all the things that you've studied. I know I don't know all of the things that you've studied, but I know over time it's probably adjusted your perspective on everything, whether it's by a little bit or a lot. And so has this like affected you significantly in any way in learning this, or did you just find it like extremely interesting?
Oh, I mean, it's very affecting just in like the like thematically what's going on here, right? Because this like predates the witch trials. This predates, the genocide of the North American indigenous population, and like
Hmm.
there are a lot of similarities in all of those events, right? Of um religion being used as a cudgel basically against either a social movement or a social group that is disliked by those with religious authority. Disliked is too weak of a word, but you know what I mean.
Hmm.
And it's just interesting, this particular example where sometimes you don't even need that, like sometimes you don't even need that pre-existing social group for power to still be the cudgel that it is, and end up like beating the group into existence that they were trying to stamp out. I don't know, it says something about like the resilience of belief that like people who maybe didn't even have strong opinions on these matters before, when they faced authority who wanted to stamp them out for believing one thing or another, they like doubled down into the thing that they weren't supposed to believe. If the skeptic account is true, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I just find that kind of powerful. I find that kind of resistance to that Inquisition powerful idea, whether or not the group pre-existed the Inquisition. It's interesting. And then yeah, it's also interesting as in that like these methods would be used again in the witch trials, because again, that's another example of like there was not actually this counter church of women who were secretly riding on brooms at night and messing with the
Yeah.
cows or whatever, but um darn tootin', they were gonna do an inquisition and witch trials anyway, and kill tens of thousands of people for it anyway. And similarly there, like then you get people who are like, you know what, fuck you, I am a witch, shut up. It's good actually. So yeah, I find that sort of
Huh.
reaction formation interesting. And this is just an early example of it. Maybe the Cathars just existed all along, and it's more just a straightforward example of another group being stamped out by power.
Hmm.
Both the skeptic case and the traditional case, I think, are both uh, just interesting, leading me to think about interesting things.
Oh, yeah, my whole brain's going like, "Whoa, man." Um, because I do distinctly remember having a conversation with someone very recently, and I to keep it short and keep it anonymous, but pretty much of like, "Hey, this is a lot worse than you think, the things that you're saying, the things that you're doing," and, realizing that, telling another person to their face, like, "This word used to mean bad things, but now we're using it in an
Yeah.
empowering way," and I'm just sitting here, I'm like, "No, wait, I'm doing that right now. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Where are we in the erasure track line? Like, hold on. I need to check the stats." But it's consistently moving around, I think, for my understanding of how the world's functioning right now. I don't know if anything I said just made a lick of sense.
I'm not sure I'm tracking exactly what you're talking about, but that's fine. I mean, it's a tough subject matter to be precise about for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I hope the listeners learn something. I hope they don't take what I told them too seriously, because like I said, I'm not an expert, and this is a subject matter about which like experts disagree. So I probably got a bunch of shit wrong, but it's still stuff that I find really interesting for all those reasons we were just talking about.
Hmm. Absolutely. I'm having a lot of thoughts all at once. Um, is there anything else you'd like to touch on?
Oh, there is one other fun word I didn't that I could have said, like consolamentum, that I didn't end up saying. It's not a great like ending point because it's just a random factoid, but I didn't get to say the word bogomil, which is fun to say. So I will explain that according to the traditional narrative about the Cathars, the Cathars originally got their dualist ideas from adherents of another Christian group called the Bogomils, who were in Central Asia, like the Caucasus, that region. And they followed there was a church leader whose name was Bogomil, Bogomil, and they were a dualist form of Christianity that was opposed to the Catholics, I think in like the 900s or something. I could be hundreds of years off there, but the traditional narrative says that the Cathars get their dualism. They're kind of related to the Bogomils, who did exist, at least as far as we know. And the Bogomils probably trace their ideas back to sort of some of the same ancient stuff that we were talking about last time I was on with the groups like the Sethians. So yeah. Anyway, Bogomil, another fun word you can say along with consolamentum.
That word obviously sounds like BOGO meals, like buy one get
one. Yeah, it does, and that's funny. I don't know what to do with that, but it is funny.
It flosses my brain lobes really nicely, so that's all it needs to do. I do want to look up the word rooting and meanings and stuff like that. I don't know what the word is for that, but
the etymology is the word you're looking for.
Yes, the etymology of BOGO meals.
One of my favorite websites on the internet is etymonline.com, where you can go and type in any word, and it's like, this English word comes from the French circa 1200, and the French meant this, which in turn comes from the Latin. It's fucking amazing. You can spend a lot of time on that website if you're a weirdo like me.
I went to go look up my name, but it was a mistake.
Oh.
Just really quickly, page 1, I typed in Roma, and I get Romany, Roman, Rome, Romance, Romanesque, Gallo-Roman, Romania.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that could be referred to by that name of yours. That's a tough one.
I don't know which one it would be. My mom just picked it up from a soap opera. Like, oh well, that'll be my little mystery for the rest of my life. But heck yeah, I feel like I learned a lot, and I feel like there's a lot that I can reflect on as well and like do more research on. Is there any places you recommend to find as accurate, quote unquote, as possible information on this if we wanted to do more homework on it?
It's tough because, like, if you go to the Wikipedia page for Cathar, it's just going to give you the traditional narrative, right? Which, might be right, but it's only half of the story, or at least it's only one possible story. So you kind of have to read a lot to be really sure. But a good bibliography, I got a bibliography from, there's a YouTube channel that I am massively indebted to on this subject matter that I love, called Esoterica. And his video on the Cathars has a good bibliography. But his video in general, and also there's a Let's Talk Religion video and a Esoterica video that are like companions to one another that lay out both the perspectives too, better than I did, frankly. But they're like experts, and so it's more like it'll be good that you heard this first, because it's more like they assume that you're already interested in this sort of stuff thing. So let me be your introduction to people who did more research on it than me.
The difference between two people who are definitely very much deep-rooted in the topic and somebody holding my hand into the first set of stairs into the topic. Yeah. So thank you, by the way. I appreciate it. I appreciate it very, very much.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
So I will do my best to remember to find YouTube links for those and put them in the Discord in the show notes as well.
Let me link you. I'll just send them to you now while you're doing your spiel.
Heck yeah. I think that's it. I think that's all of the things. I think we did the thing. The thing is happy. I think it's time to do the outro.
I think so.
I don't think I have anything other things. Okay. I'm so bad at transitions.
They're tough. You kind of just have to bowl through them. Be like, all right, we're doing this now.
We're on Discord. I can't see bodily language of like, oh, you're good. Okay, let's move forward. Now I'm like, I eat.
Right.
So, Wheels.
Yeah.
Where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me on Twitter at Singular Wheels. And you can find me on Very Random Encounters. That might be it right now. Yeah, you can also buy my book of Very Random Encounters. Just search for sorry, not my book. It is the book that I wrote with the Very Random Encounters people, but it's not called Very Random Encounters. The book is called The Ultimate Random Encounters Book. So just search that on Amazon or anywhere books are sold. And you should be able to find that. It's nice. It's a nice book of tabletop role playing, random encounters, encounter prompts, help you kind of get the improv juices flowing in a tabletop session. And then you can also listen to me play tabletop games on Very Random Encounters. And then, yeah, Twitter at Singular Wheels.
Hell yeah. You can find me on the internet as well if you want to. I think Wheels was definitely the more interesting one this episode, but if you decide you want to find me on the internet.
Oh, please.
It is at twitter.com/I appreciate your butt. That is IAPPRECI, the number 8 BRUTT. Yeah, I can spell.
You put an R in there, but where it didn't belong, but I think people get it. BUTT.
Have you watched have you listened to the Beetlejuice musical soundtrack?
I don't think so. I mean, I've seen the movie.
The musical, the long story, I should probably do a Hyperfix episode about Beetlejuice the musical.
Uh-huh. You said it twice. We got to be careful.
So in the musical, there is a song where he's introducing himself to Barbara and Adam. And he does a whole thing where he spells out his name, but stumbles over it and completely fucks it up. And he's like, who gives a fuck? And then like cheerleaders in the background start spelling it correctly in a very cheerleader style.
Because it looks like it would be Beetlegeist, right? That's the whole thing.
Yes, but he spells it with the juice.
Like juice, yeah.
And every time I spell out my name, I used to be able to do it perfect every single time, but now in the recent years, it's just falls right out the window, and I have that exact moment in my head every single time. I'll find the song for you. There's cute animatics for it, but so you could find my personal Twitter there. And you can also find this podcast as a whole at the Hyperfixation Pod or the Hyperfix Pod at twitter.com and tumblr.com. And thank you to Moonshot for giving me this podcast. You can find Moonshot at Moonshot Pods on the twitter.com and Moonshot Network on twitch.tv, I believe. It's one or the other. Thank you to Kingdom for editing these episodes. That is Tachyon Kingdom at twitter.com. So if you need an editor for your podcast, go talk to Kingdom. Highly recommend it. Does amazing work. And last but not least, thank you to Offuscate. That is OFUSKATE for my intro and outro music. You can find them on Twitter, Instagram, SoundCloud, and yeah, just those 3 places. And if you need podcast music, that's your person. And I think that's it. That is all of the things. I did all of the things. Look at us. So everybody, be safe. Don't die. Drink your water. Take your vitamins. And Badoo?
Woo!
Welcome, one and all, to Riley Hopkins and their amazing friends, the actual play podcast that steals. What does that mean? That means that we take stories from corporations and come back and tell our own fanfic-inspired actual plays with them. We do things like a Star Wars podcast that takes place 300 years after The Last Jedi. What if any Zoids media was good? We tell stories in those spaces that are better than the ones that the corporations tell us, because we're not cowards. Please, come join us at Riley Hopkins and their amazing friends to hear a plethora of wonderful stories every once in a while on the Moonshot Podcast Network. Riley Hopkins and their amazing friends. Hosted by me, Riley Hopkins.